So in today's video, we will be talking about map state to props. In the last video, we talked about map dispatch to props, and today we will be talking about the second aspect of Connect, that is extracting data with map state to props. As the first argument passed in to connect, map state to props is used for selecting the part of the data from the store that the connected component needs. It's frequently referred to as just map states for short. It is called every time the store state changes and it receives the entire store state and should return an object of data this component needs. So we have already used this function a lot of times, but let us just go through it once more. So how to define this function? So we'll write map state to props, and inside that we are going to pass state or ownProps. So generally we pass state because ownProps is optional. So the first argument is state and optionally a second argument called ownProps. And what is it going to return? Returns a plain object containing the data that the connected component needs. This function should be passed as the first argument to connect and will be called every time when the Redux store changes. So called every time the Redux store state changes. If we do not wish to subscribe to the store, then we will pass null or undefined to connect in place of map state to props. So it does not matter if a map state to props function is written using the function keyword or as an arrow function. So instead of function, you can also use const map to state. So here you can also write it as const map state, and then we will give state as the argument, and then we will write it like this. So this doesn't matter how it is written. It will work the same either way. Talking about the arguments of this function, the first argument is the state, and the second argument is ownProps, but that is optional. So the first argument to map state to props function is the entire Redux store state. That is the same value returned by a call to store.getState. This is the same thing that we will get in the output of store.getState. Because of this, the first argument is traditionally just called state. We can give it any name that we want, but store would not be the appropriate thing. So we will never call it store, we will call it state or any other name we want. Because it is the state value, not the store instance. So we will never call it store. So the map to state props function should always be written with at least state passed in. So it is important to pass at least state as an argument. Next is the ownProps. We may define the function with the second argument ownProps if our component needs the data from its own props to retrieve data from the store. So here we have to retrieve data from the store From its own props, then we will use ownProps. This argument will contain all of the props given to the wrapper component that was generated by connect. For example, if I write ownProps, then I will create some const, say parameter or say property, and this property is assigned to state. Next, I will have a const, say ID. This is assigned to ownProps. So this is going to use ownProps. And maybe this is the IDs of type of 1, 2, 3 or some numbers, and then we will connect our component to the ID. So this is how we are going to use to retrieve the data. Let me just comment it out. We do not need to include values from ownProps in the object returned from mapStateToProps. Connect will automatically merge those different prop sources into a final set of props. Next, we are going to talk about the return of this function. So it returns a plain object. We have already discussed that, and it contains the data that the component needs. So this is what return it is going to return. So each field in the object will become a prop from our actual component. The values in the fields will be used to determine if our component needs to re-render. So the basic concept of using Redux was that we do not want to re-render our components. So we will check all the values in the fields, and then if it needs to be re-rendered, it will be re-rendered, or else it will not be re-rendered. So according to the official website of React Redux, in advanced scenarios where we need to control over the rendering performance, mapStateToProps can also return a function. So along with an object, it can also return a function. In that case, the function will be used as the final map to state props for a particular component instance. This will allow us to do per instance memoization. So this will allow us to do per instance memoization. So map state to props function can and should do a lot more than just return state or some slice. So what is it doing? It is just returning a plain object, but this function has a lot more capability to do a lot more things. They have the responsibility of reshaping the stored data as needed for that component. This may include returning a value as a specific prop name, combining pieces of data from different parts of the state tree, and transforming the stored data in different ways. So it can also reshape the stored data. We have talked about selectors also. So we can use selector functions to extract and transform data. Selector functions are very helpful to encapsulate the process of extracting values from specific locations in the state tree. Memoized selector function also play a key role in improving application performance. So back to map state to props function. There is a convention that map state to props function should be fast. So whenever the state changes, all the map state to prop functions of all the connected components will start running. Because of this, your map state to props function should run as fast as possible. This means that a slow map state to props function can be a potential bottleneck in your application. So as a part of the reshaping data idea, map state to prop function frequently needs to transform data in various ways. So the next is transforming data, such as filtering an array, mapping an array of IDs to their corresponding objects, or extracting plain JavaScript values from immutable JavaScript objects. These transformations can often be expensive, but both in terms of cost to execute the transformation and whether the component re-renders as a result. If performance is a concern, ensure that these transformations are only run if the input values are changed. So we need to make sure that this does not hamper the overall user experience of our application and it does not make the application slow. So we will re-render only when we have some changes. The next important thing is the map state to props function should be pure and synchronous. So much like the Redux reducer, a map state to props function should always be 100% pure and synchronous. It should take state as argument and return the data the components needs as props without mutating those arguments. It should not be used to trigger asynchronous behavior like an AJAX call for data fetching, and a function should not be declared as async. So, mapStateToProps function has nothing to do with asynchronous actions or asynchronous activities. It will always be pure and synchronous. Also, it will never mutate the props or the arguments. Now we will talk about the function of the performance of maps take to props. So React Redux internally implements the should component update method such that the wrapper component re-renders precisely when the data our component needs has changed. So by default, React Redux decides whether the contents of the object returned from map to state are different using the comparison operator. That is the shallow equality on each field of the returned object. So it is going to do this automatically behind the screen and we will never know about what is going on. So this is what React Redux internally does. If any of the field has changed, then our component will be re-rendered so it can receive the updated values as props. Next, returning a mutated object of the same reference is a common mistake that can result in our component not re-rendering when expected. So have to keep in mind about the reference to the object. So to sum up, map state to prop will run. When will it run and how will it react? Let me just sum up that. So map state to props runs when number one, when it has state and state props. First is the only state as an argument. So I'm just passing. state as an argument. So here it runs when the store state changes. And second, when I'm giving state and ownProps both as an argument. So then when will it render? When the store state changes or any field of ownProps is different. Next, this is the first scenario, and the second scenario, the component re-render. Component re-renders when, so in that first case again, we will have state. So I will just copy this and then paste it so that you can understand better. So when I'm giving store, so here any field of state props is different. Only then the component will re-render. And in the second case, if any field of state props is different or of own props. So here both will be checked, that is any field of state props or own props is different, then it will re-render. React Redux does allow shallow comparisons to see if the map state to props results have changed. It's easy to accidentally return new object or array reference every time, which would cause our component to re-render even if the data is actually the same. So many common operations results in new objects or array references being created. So if we create new arrays with some array.map or some array.filter. Next is merging arrays with concat. So it will be array.concat. Or if you are selecting portions of an array by array.slice. Next object.assign and many more. So putting these operations in memoized selector functions to ensure that they only run if the input values have changed. This will also ensure that if the input values haven't changed, mapStateToProps will still return the same value as before and Connect can skip the re-rendering. So what are we going to do is that we are going to only perform expensive operations when the data changes. Transforming data can often be expensive and usually results in a new object references being created. In order for our mapToStateProps function to be as fast as possible, we should only re-render these complex transformations when the relevant data has changed. So there are a few approaches to this. So the first one is some transformations could be calculated in an action creator or reducer and the transform data could be kept in store. So changes to be tracked in action or reducer and stored in the store. Next is transformation can also be done in a component's rendered method. So transformation inside the render method. The third one is if the transformation does need to be done in mapStateToProp function, then we will use the memoized selector function. So the third is memoized selector function. This will ensure the transformation is only run when the input values have changed. Now, the mapStateToProps will not run if the store state is the same. What do I mean when I say this? The wrapper component generated by connect subscribes to the Redux store. Every time an action is dispatched, it calls store.getState and checks if the last state is equivalent to the current state. So this is what it is going to check if the two state values are identical by reference, then it will not rerun our map-to-state function because it assumes that the rest of the store state hasn't changed either. The Redux combine reducers utility function tries to optimize for this. If none of the slice reducers return a new value, then combine reducers returns the old state object instead of a new one. This means that mutation in a reducer can lead to the root state object not being updated, and thus the UI won't render. So combine reducers is a savior. Next is the number of declared arguments affects the behavior. So with just state, the function runs whenever the root store state object is different. With state and object own props, it returns anytime the store state is different and also whenever the wrapper props have changed. This means that we should not add own props arguments unless we actually need to use it in your map state to props function and will run more often than it needs to. So there are some edge cases around this behavior. The number of mandatory arguments determines whether map to state will receive own props. So if the formal definition of the function contains one mandatory parameter, map state to props will not receive the props. It will receive own props when the formal definition of the function contains 0 or 2 mandatory parameters. So the first case is one mandatory parameter. So here no own props. And in case of 0 or 2 mandatory parameters, then we are going to pass own props. So that is all about map state to props. I hope that everything is clear and you have got all the concepts of mapStateToProps function. So do like our video and subscribe to our channel, and we will return with more simple concepts for React.js and Redux for beginners. And that's it for today's video. I'll see you in the next video.